Push the button yet? Oh, you pushed the button. Oh, hey, we are.
The button has been pushed, wrestling fans. The button is pushed.
What's up, wrestling fans? I'm cleaning my glasses so I can see you all out there on the interwebs. Oh, yeah, there's everybody. I see you all now. What's happening, everybody?
It's the Two Bros Wrestling Show. And, Doug, we are here to not talk about a pay-per-view or review or preview either one, a pay-per-view. We have a topic tonight, a main event topic for the first time in a couple of months.
I'm just shocked. Are you sure there's not a pay-per-view we can review or preview somewhere out there? I mean, they just seem to keep falling out of the sky at this point.
In fairness, we did do a dual preview of both an AEW and WWE pay-per-view. Took a month break, but made sure we came back for SummerSlam. So by the time you factor those things in, it's been since June since we've had a topic like the one we have tonight. And there really is, I guess, no topic like the one we have tonight in our main event. It's something we've been eager to actually have this show to talk about because it's all the wrestling world is talking about, and that is the fall of Vince McMahon and the future of WWE under a Triple H Stephanie leadership. And that is what we're going to be talking about when we get to our main event topic. But Doug, as we do,
there it is. There we go. What's in the news, Kevin?
Well, in the news that is not Vince McMahon, Triple H, SummerSlam. I know we're going to be talking about Triple H and what he's brought to the table or what we think he may bring to the table, but more proof of concept here. The follow-up to a critically almost universally praised SummerSlam. We gave it good reviews here on our show last week. Raw gained its biggest audience in 2 years on Monday night. It averaged 2.23 million viewers across the 3-hour time frame. That is the most since March 2020 and the very first empty arena show of the pandemic era. So again, proof and concept is that at least for right now, shiny new things, fans are engaged with what Triple H is doing with the product.
So that's bigger than like a WrestleMania bump, a post-WrestleMania Raw bump right there. That's pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive. I agree. So again, we'll talk more about Triple H in our main event topic, but good signs. Let's see what Raw does for this upcoming week. And not so good signs for at least the near future, but Becky Lynch, the man, suffered a separated shoulder during her SummerSlam match with Bianca Belair. That is what you saw on Raw this past week was not a work. That is a shoot that actually happened early on in the contest. And again, shows one, how tough Becky is and the pro that she is, because not only did she suck it up to finish the match, the two had one of the best matches of the night. And now, unfortunately, the man is going to be out for several months. More injury news, unfortunate injury news. Ilya Dragunov is also injured. In this case, it's an ankle, not a shoulder, but also appears that the man who finally conquered Walter / Gunther is going to have to relinquish the NXT UK Championship as a result, and a new champion is going to be decided and determined via tournament that will begin on NXT UK. Speaking of championship tournaments, Doug, the WWE Women's Tag Team titles will finally receive a tournament. It's been interesting because those belts were stripped from Naomi and Sasha Banks after the two walked out on WWE Raw a few months back, very famously. Initial talk was, hey, we're going to strip them of the titles and have this tournament. And then it went radio silence, which led some folks to conjecture anyways that Vince was turning away from women's tag team wrestling. And it certainly seemed like they'd never really put enough into that to begin with. And so not on Triple H's watch, tournament starts next week. They mentioned that on the most recent edition of SmackDown. So women's tag team tournaments beginning next week, another Triple H effect. Again, more on that here in a moment, but Doug, promising things.
Really interesting things. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to talk about them, but yeah, promising things across the board.
promising things in women's wrestling. This time on the other major brand, AEW. Madison Rayne has joined AEW, newly hired away from Impact. The Knockout Legend is not just a wrestler. She wrestled for the first time on Rampage this past week, but she is actually working behind the scenes and will be a AEW coach and basically be heading up the creative side of AEW's women's division. I think that's a good signing. Madison Rayne has a lot of good years in the business and a good mind for the business and can still go in the ring.
And she was acting. Come on in here. Come on. Hold on.
No problem. We'll move on to the next news item. Big news for gamers as AEW has announced a ton of new details on its highly anticipated first ever console wrestling game. THQ and Ukes have both joined together, and you might recognize those names as two creative partners that have been involved in WWE games in the past. But THQ and Ukes have joined forces to create AEW's Fight Forever, and that game is scheduled to be released later on this year. Kenny Omega is a huge gamer, as most of wrestling fans out there know, and also an AEW executive vice president. He's had a major hand in bringing this game to life. He said in the press release surrounding Fight Forever that he told Tony Khan that he, please just let me assemble the best gaming team on the planet to make the best wrestling game all the time. So we'll see how they do with that. But obviously there's a lot of promise considering those involved. Some of the best WWE games were back in the old THQ Uke creative eras. It's said, Doug, that this wrestling game is going to have an arcade feel. It's different than what wrestling games have sort of become over the last several years. It also is going to feature innovative tandem offensive moves as well as online co-op wrestling going completely next level with tag team matches that feature sequences of team maneuvers performed with simple commands. And in addition, gamers will also be able to utilize a long roster from AEW wrestling roster, a deep career mode, create a wrestler, which is always like a very popular feature in any game. And a lot of what they say in the press release are, quote, signature AEW arenas, multiple match types, and even good old-fashioned unsanctioned fun. And I have confirmed by reading through a lot of the details that were also contained in the footers of the release. Yes, of those unique game modes and matches, you are going to have an exploding barbed wire death match. And hopefully it goes better than the one they actually had.
Oh, that's very appropriate. I was getting a request to go help with the game right now. It's like, I can't right now. You'll have to pause and wait or work through it yourself.
Did someone say game, right?
Exactly. What, we're talking games in here? By the way, can I get some help with this one? So that game's going to be on pause until 9, I think, until we're finished with this.
Well, he'll get to it faster than we'll get to AEW's Fight Forever because there's still no release date for Fight Forever. Just sometime this year. It is available, though, for pre-order from most retailers now. So you can go ahead and get on the front end of that if you wish. Ric Flair's last wrestling match was last weekend and televised on Fight and other pay-per-view outlets, and it drew in person there in Nashville 6,800 fans and had a gate that was just shy of $500,000. So that makes Ric Flair's last match the second largest independent show of all time. Only All In, the original All In, beats it in attendance and in gate. So congratulations, Ric Flair, on your retirement. We'll see how long that one. Again, 73, and but hey, to his credit, this was the first time he was in the ring in like 12 years, or so. I think it was 12 since he'd stepped away from Impact, but he should have gone out with that beautiful Shawn Michaels match, but hopefully Rick can stay retired this time. He is the greatest of all time. There's very little question about that, and deserves to be sent off into the sunset with all the praise that a legend of his stature, has earned. And then finally, last thing I want to mention in the opening bell news segment is just a congratulations to wrestling talents and real life couple Casey Lee, Sean Spears. They went public this week that they are, in fact, pregnant with the couple's first child. So congratulations to Casey and Deshaun. So Chairman hadn't been seen in a few weeks. I guess he's had other things going on a little bit more important.
And the Iconics, and I'm sorry, what were they called in TNA? They have retired, right?
They have retired, yes. Yeah, they went off to do other creative endeavors, but in Casey's case, I believe that included family time. So
who knows? Endeavor. I mean,
it doesn't get much more creative than that.
I mean, you're creating a life. Can't call that one not great.
No, but yeah, exciting news for both of them. Both of them extremely talented in ring too. So who knows? Never say never in wrestling. Ric Flair, we just talked about his last match at 73. I can't imagine, family or no family, that we've seen the last of Casey Lee in the ring. Hopefully not at her young age. Would love to see her back in action. And with that, Doug, are you ready?
Man,
for the big topic, the big, heavy, weighty topic.
So, this, I don't think it's over dramatic to say that this is probably the biggest wrestling news story of our wrestling fandom, our wrestling lifetime here. That Vincent Kennedy McMahon steps away from WWE, retires. This is it's huge, man. It's huge. It's very unfortunate.
The way I worded it like that, like it being of our wrestling lifetime, because before we really get into the meat of this, let's pause for a minute, because it did strike me the other day. We're so excited to talk about this and to debate what this means and what happened, what really think about the fact that you and I, we are not young men.
You're not.
We have been wrestling fans for a very long time. For me, going on 36-ish, 37 years, similar for you. We're talking like, early 80s. There is not, as long as we've been loving this business, this is the first time in our lives that the center of the wrestling landscape is not either Vince McMahon or a reaction to Vince McMahon. Everything that we've experienced as fans up to this point has either been Vince's doing or someone trying to compete with Vince McMahon. That's kind of mind-boggling to think about.
It really is. We had all this when Vince was buying WCW back in the day, which I'm sure we'll talk about. That was creating a monopoly there. There were arguments about that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Everything that we have essentially experienced from him gobbling up the territories, WCW, TNA, everything is, you're right. It's a reaction. I hadn't even thought about that. That's ECW. I could go on and on and on here.
He was the template. He pushed the envelope, and then everyone had to follow suit to compete. And so our entire wrestling memories have been shaped by Vince McMahon. It is not I think I said this last week, it is not an exaggeration. You can talk about greatest of all time, best wrestlers, best matches, there's no one that has meant more, for better or worse. I'm not defending, the things that we'll get into in a minute, but just from a pure business and creative and wrestling standpoint, no one's stamp is on professional wrestling, and what we sometimes take for granted is professional wrestling presentation, than Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
And really not just the presentation, but the way it is organized, because before Vincent Kennedy McMahon, we had territories. There are still territories, I guess, that exist, but not like they did back in the day when Vince was a true disruptor to the business model that was professional wrestling.
Absolutely. And like, with all we need to talk about, and we know we don't have enough time to cover the history of Vince McMahon. That's a whole topic in and to itself, but just, the Cliff Notes version is the fact that it wasn't a given that Vince McMahon was going to be, that the McMahon dynasty, as it were, that WWE was going to be a family business. Yes, Vince Sr. had the Worldwide Wrestling Federation as a territory, but Vince Jr., Vincent Kennedy McMahon, didn't even meet his father till he was 12 years old. And so young Vince at 12, it wasn't a given he was going to go into the family business. He was a failed traveling salesman is what his first job was. It's not like his dad was grooming him for the business, but eventually Vince Jr. ended up in the business, worked his way up through the old man's territory, got some small promoting gigs for his father in a little section of the territory, ended up on camera, became the voice of WWF, on screen. And then as the old man was ailing in 1982, bought the business away from his dad. And as they say, the rest is history. Through money and moxie, Vince pretty much took wrestling from a small regional activity. Everyone had their own little region and territory, and used that money arrogantly and aggressively to buy up everyone's top stars and to put them on the WWF roster. Doug, I mean, I know TBS was there first. That was really his only competition, was the NWA / what became WCW. Essentially, Jim Crockett Promotions is the only one that had the same foresight of, we don't need to be on our local TV station only. We can go bigger with this. And there used to be this honor among thieves thing, is like, you don't go into someone else's territory. Vince stomped all over that.
All over that, man. Like you say, he went in and just cherry picked the top guys from everywhere. And I mean, that was just something you did not do. That's what I talk about when talking about how he's a disruptor for the business model. Everybody had their own little fiefdoms, their own little kingdoms, right? Vince just said, borders, schmorders, whatever. I want Hogan, I want Savage, I want Flair, I want Rhodes. I'm just getting them all.
And essentially, by cherry picking those that he wanted and being on cable television instead of local syndicated television shows that aired at noon on Saturdays or midnight on Friday nights, which is the way a lot of regional wrestling aired, he basically killed the territory. The territory system that had existed for most of last century went away once Vince McMahon took over in the 80s. And the only thing left standing was Jim Crockett Promotions, that became WCW, and when Ted Turner bought him out. And that was a battle that lasted for a while, a good decade of, and when I say a good decade, I mean that literally, like the golden age for wrestling fans. I mean, it was the golden age, the Monday Night Wars. But once Vince won that in 2001, he basically was without serious competition for the remainder of his tenure. It really was AEW in the last few years that even came close to being a close second. And they were definitely always second. Doug, I know we're going to probably say a lot of bad things about Vince here in the latter half of our show, but just taking anything he may or may not have done out of it, as a business person and as someone who changed the business, what is that creative legacy of Vince McMahon?
Well, I mean, just going from, I mean, clearly, I think he sets this. We set the stage already. There was this clear, unspoken rule that Vince just railroaded through, taking all the talent. But let's not forget that the sheer biggest, I think, creative thing that Vince did was WrestleMania. I mean, that set the stage for all wrestling pay-per-views after at that point. I mean, Vince has done a lot of creative, some good, some bad. In the latter years, I mean, we've heard me rant like an old man screaming at clouds on here about creative decisions for WWE. But I mean, early on, I mean, had long as the Attitude Era, those 10 good, that good decade, those 10 good years of wrestling, that was, Vince has always been head of creative. So, I mean, you could just take your pick of any of the stars of that Attitude Era. There you go.
I know that, you and I have talked on this show many times about how when we were kids, we were more NWA fans because we didn't like the cartoony nature of WWE programming. That was also Vince, maybe not at his best creatively, but for targeting children and getting families and getting sponsors and getting, celebrities to show up at WrestleMania and to legitimize wrestling from blood and guts and smoky armories, which is what a lot of people thought of wrestling, looking their nose down on it. He did turn it into, instead of Saturday Night Live this week, we're going to present to you professional wrestling on national television. That we take that for granted. Those things happen now, but they sure didn't happen then. That was very, very unique and forward thinking at the time. And WrestleMania is a great example of how Vince could take other people's ideas and capitalize, because, NWA was doing Starrcade, big events. These things were happening, closed circuit or come down to the Omni kind of things. But to do it on pay-per-view and to throw in Liberace and Ray Charles and the Rockettes and Mr. T in the main event, I mean, the sideshow aspect of, you got to see this, folks. There was never a carnival barker as successful as Vince McMahon, was there?
I really do not think so. I mean, definitely a carny business, but really, like you said, he didn't have to be the first, but he was the best at it. I mean, how many Starrcades have we had? How many WrestleManias have we had?
You mentioned ECW. So when the family-friendly thing started wearing off, ECW was already the alternative. They were already edgy, and so Vince sees that, and hey, we got the resources to take that and make it big, and he did. I mean, the Attitude Era, again, the golden age of wrestling, ended up helping him win the war, put WCW out of business, and when WCW shut down in 2001, that pretty much has been the last 21 years of Vince McMahon's creative life and our wrestling lives, is that it's Vince McMahon and everything else.
And you think about it, Vince McMahon is almost like the Walt Disney of wrestling, recognizing that you get them young, and every 7 years that audience is going to change or evolve or completely refresh. So he got us young with those cartoony kind of things, and others of our generation were kind of brought in and kind of evolved into WCW. And then we had this Attitude Era that brought our attention back around to that. It was like, well, hey, I remember these guys, where back when everybody had a occupation to go along with their gimmick. And that kind of started to phase out then. But, he, to a degree, I think through the majority of his career, could recognize those changes and how to make them and pivot with the populace to a degree.
You say to a degree he could do this. You also say that you were the old man shouting at clouds. So that's my question for you: is when did, in your opinion, Vince lose that magic creative touch? Because I know at one point in time, WCW at the tail end was the not cool wrestling thing to watch, because what they were doing on Vince's show was so creative, edgy. And at a certain point, you can only push the envelope so far. And then the last few years, wrestling fans have tended to talk about out of touch Vince McMahon. So when did that happen in your mind?
So I think, it probably started with the fall of WCW. There was no legitimate competition then. None. TNA was a blip on the radar. It later become Impact, still a blip on the radar. Still something he would not let his people mention, although he did start to loosen that and let folks go and be part of like certain TNA events, the Impact events. But I really think, especially in the last 10 years, when there's almost a sigh of relief. It's like, okay, I've done it. I've conquered the wrestling world. There's nothing else for me to do. I can now be an audience of one and just sit back and laugh and enjoy what I enjoy.
That's what I had in my notes too, honestly, that his biggest victory ended up in some ways being his downfall creatively. 2001, he was up until the time he killed off WCW. Once it ended, there was no mountains left to conquer. And I think it was hard for him to stay on the pulse of what next when there was no one pushing him to do so. And there was no other examples really that were large enough and successful enough for him to duplicate and rip off in some ways the way he did, like Starrcade or an ECW or something else. He was literally left to his own devices. And I think the way you worded it there is apropos in many ways. He was the audience of one, writing things only for himself. And we all went along for the ride because there was no alternative that was better. And there, in some points of time, there was no alternative at all.
Right. I mean, everybody couldn't watch Ring of Honor every week or MLW or New Japan, so American wrestling was WWE, was Vince McMahon for what'd you say, since the 80s, since 82?
Yeah, he had it since 82. And involved with WWE since 69.
Right.
Yeah, like crazy. So this brings us up to the modern day. I mean, I think we both can agree that Vince has been out of touch, and that not that he's been without a good eye for, like, Theory is a great example. I mean, he's not been completely creatively bankrupt, but I think that his best years were definitely when he was head to head fighting for his life and the business, when Ted Turner was legitimately knocking on the door of shutting WWE down. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the plan became clear that the succession was going to be one day Vince retires and Stephanie and her husband Triple H are going to take over. Now, first of all, why do you think it is that Stephanie got this nod a couple of decades ago and it became apparent that she was the chosen one and not Shane?
I've often wondered about that, and wonder about Vince's relationship with his own father and how that plays into. I don't want to get into like McMahon family dynamics here and start doing like armchair therapy, but I wonder if those dynamics between Vince and his father rolled over into Vince and Shane, because Shane left the WWE a very long time ago to basically, forge his own way and do something completely unrelated to wrestling, only to come back, 5-10 years later, for again really like a blip on the wrestling radar, and then be gone again and get fired by his own dad.
Fired by his own dad. I think from his leaving to then getting fired by his dad, like these couple of stints. I think again, it is some armchair psychology, but I think that Vince saw more of himself in his daughter than he did in his son, and so I think that she became that choice of the one who will ultimately succeed me. And this is what has happened. But ironically, there was some twists and turns in this story on the way to this happening. Doug, a little bit about that, like Triple H falling out of favor and then Stephanie stepping away just a few short months ago to spend more time with her family, when both of these things reportedly were Vince pushing out the duo that were ultimately his chosen successors. He was getting rid of them.
So very, very interesting, because I mean, I heard it today called Classic NXT. Black and Gold NXT, one of the greatest things the WWE produced in recent years, only for it to be completely overhauled when Paul Levesque had a what they refer to it, a cardiac event, and then it got its overhaul. Then it almost looked like Triple H was being punished for not going head to head and winning these imaginary Wednesday night wars that there were. And I'm not even sure why Stephanie gets pushed out. I at least on a surface level, you can look and see, well, okay, there's Triple H's punishment for failing in Vince's eyes or whatever, but Stephanie, I have no idea, because they pretty much threw Stephanie under the bus, pretty much just railroaded her, only for her to swing back around and go, oh yeah, hi, I'm in charge now.
I mean, that's the big swerve, and I mean, what more of a wrestling plot line can you get than the McMahon family squabbling, and it actually be legit? You are my chosen one. I'm firing my son. I'm choosing my daughter and my son-in-law instead. Wait a minute. I'm blaming my son-in-law for not winning the Monday Night Wars. I mean, I'm sorry, the Wednesday night imaginary wars, because I'm still thinking of the Monday Night Wars. Right. So you're gone. And then behind the scenes, reportedly, he was not happy with the business side of what Stephanie had been doing and forced his own daughter out. But in the end, Doug, to borrow his own phrase, Vince screws Vince.
Well, it wasn't Vince screwing Vince that got him in trouble. Allegedly. But there is some fun to be had with some wrestling conspiracies here. Just talk about what a cerebral assassin Triple H truly is. If somebody had to leak that to the board, somebody had to leak that to the Wall Street Journal and get this whole investigation started. And I'm just going to let that lie there. Go to town in Speculation Station. Comments down below. Let's hear it. Let's hear those theories.
So just to encapsulate this into the time capsule so that we're complete with this, bringing up to the modern day, the fall of Vince, essentially, as we all know, was, as Doug alluded to, the board caught wind of a $3 million payment to a paralegal on WWE's payroll. This happened earlier this year, and they chose to investigate. And while he was doing this, apparently to hush up this affair, and the investigation was ongoing by the board, suddenly we get this news after he was temporarily removed that Vince is going to retire. And that's what we all have been, talking about, the retirement of Vince McMahon. But a new AK report filing by WWE, that's a federal filing that they have to put out, noted that McMahon's departure is a resignation and not a retirement, as has been stated publicly. So we should say that on the factual side of things, that this was not a retirement. Vince, as we had speculated for a while before this became knowledge, and they had to release this, we speculated that Vince was not going to go down without a fight. He was being arrogant on television to show he was still in charge. Creatively, he was doing a lot to show that I'm not going down swinging. And then, oh, hey, guys, it's been a great career. I'm going to retire. That just didn't play like that was a real sincere and legitimate retirement. Doug, in addition, the company has made in that same AK filing a preliminary determination that certain payments that McMahon had authorized, approximately $14.6 million is what we're up to now, were never recorded in WWE financial statements, and that this all took place between 2006, 2028. WWE official has, responded to this by saying that the wording in that proposed report was that Vince McMahon had paid that money from his own personal funds and not from WWE money. But that's not actually what it says if you read it to the letter. The statement in the release is that the expenses were or will be paid by McMahon personally. That will be can be a really important qualifier in this story, because they also, in this filing, were saying that for corporate accounting reasons that they will be adjusting the books, the corporate books for 2019, 20, and 21 to account for those expenses. You wouldn't be accounting for those expenses if they were personal payments from Vince McMahon.
Right. That's a lot. That's a lot of payouts, and doesn't one of those include like a $7 million NDA with a WWE, a former WWE talent?
Yeah, and no speculation really. I mean, on who that may be, and not that it matters, but yes, one of those was a former talent. All of these ladies apparently had worked for WWE at any one time. Actually, the documentation that they're supposed to file to reconcile those books is supposed to be publicly revised by this Tuesday, and there's no indication yet whether or not they're going to make that deadline. The company also noted in this filing that they had received regulatory, investigative, and enforcement inquiries, subpoenas, or demands arising from, related to, or in connection with the matters related to the conduct of McMahon and the expenses. So it was not specified that the payments to women that had previously been claimed to be paid by McMahon personally and not from company funds, but constitute any of that amount of money. But it would likely be something that, when uncovered, has forced Vince out of the company and would warrant outside investigations. This is not just the board. That investigation continues, but outside regulatory investigations means there's something wrong with the books enough connected to McMahon's actions, or alleged actions, we should say, that's warranting some closer look by the government.
Yeah. And I think it's, with all this, as a little bit more comes out, it becomes a little bit more clear to why it's probably time for Vince to step away.
Oh, yes.
And why he was essentially featured endeavored from his own company.
Because there was time, like right after we hear this news, I'm sure I wasn't the only one to think this. You see it speculated online a lot too, that he's going to be back. Like, we can't imagine the wrestling world without Vince McMahon. It's like, this will blow over. John Laurinaitis will go, down in flames, take the fall. Vince will come back and resume ownership until he dies. And the key revelation in this report, these findings that they had to release, is that it would be almost impossible for Vince McMahon to return to power. And this is not a temporary departure until the heat dies down, which was what many in wrestling in the locker rooms who had seen Vince, make it through everything. A lot of believed after this Vince resignation that he would be back.
Well, we all know. I mean, we talked about Ric Flair's retirement match at the top of the show. We all know wrestling retirements traditionally do not last. But
true. But this was not. Again, this is not a retirement. This was a forced resignation. And then, Doug, after this disclosure, WWE in this disclosure also warned investors that the lack of Vince McMahon and his creativity and making new storylines and stars could, affect the bottom line, affect the product, affect the ratings, and it could be some volatility for a while. But when WWE released its expected second quarter financial results early, it showed $328 million in revenue, and the numbers were above what most analysts had projected. And so they were trying to protect that gain. And all that happened by trying to sneak this in with an early release of those financials to try to mitigate any volatility from Vince's resignation is that the stock price instead went up. So you combine that with the fact what we talked about in our opening bell, that the ratings are up. What does old man Vince McMahon, who is at home watching the product, he can't just cut off from this. His family's still involved for no other, if nothing else. What do you think a man the size, who has the ego the size of Vince McMahon, thinks as he watches ratings go up and stock shoot up just because, hey, ding dong, the witch is dead?
That's a very interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that, but because I've been thinking of it from a financial point of view, because Vince still owns what 30-some% of the company. He is still the majority owner of this publicly traded company, so its financials still have an impact on him beyond him getting a paycheck from the company. I mean, he still owns the majority of it, so it's good for his bank account and for any future NDAs he has to pay out, I guess. But creatively, I'm not sure. I'm sure it's eating at him, and to see that his son-in-law, which seems to have been punished in recent months, taking over as head of creative and talent relations, is doing a bang-up job right out of the gate. Or maybe in the old man's super ego, he's like, well, yeah, this is just the pop, it'll die down, and then we'll get Isaac Yankem back in there, I guess. I don't know.
And you don't know. There could be a curiosity blip on the radar. I mean, we said at the start of the show, it was the largest rating that Raw had pulled since the first show in front of an empty arena, which we know was people like, what in the world is this going to be like, tuning in? So once that curiosity of, there's something going on over here, let's check it out, people may tune out a little bit. It might be a temporary rise. And I know that would probably satisfy Vince's ego if that ends up being right. But only time's going to tell on that one. The future for Vince himself, while financially it looks pretty solid, these investigations that are mounting, Doug, I'm not hearing a lot about this just yet. Obviously, it's just way too much speculation, way too little known. But, I mean, it's not out of the question that we're not talking fines and things that need to be repaid. There could be jail time associated with the type of malfeasance that Vince potentially could be subjected to when you start talking millions and millions of dollars and the reconciliation of books for 3 years worth of financials.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. That's an interesting concept. I've been so stuck on Vince is gone. I mean, the ramifications of legal ramifications is, okay, Vince is gone. There's going to be some financial turbulence for the company. What does this mean for the long run? Hadn't even thought about, actual legal ramifications from all of this.
It could very well. But the financial, like you said, that is more immediate and more obvious. And before I guess we get into the creative, because I'm eager to talk about that too, what we think about Steph and Triple H and the jobs they're doing or where they may go with this. Before we look ahead and speculate on their futures, let's consider that the future of the WWE might be completely different than what we're thinking with Triple H and Stephanie in charge, because this could be temporary. Part of the reason the stock went up is that the stock market, Wall Street, seems to think that the ouster of Vince McMahon makes it way more likely that WWE becomes out of the McMahon hands altogether and sold to another entity. Doug, what do you think about the likelihood that WWE, which has kind of been rumored the last few years of maybe being for sale if the price is right, do you think that likelihood of that occurring has increased significantly now that Vince is kind of out of the decision picture on that?
I think it is absolutely that has absolutely increased. And let's face it, if you own a company and you're wanting to sell that company, you have to make that company look as financially viable as possible. Quarter after quarter after quarter, WWE has done that. We've covered way too many talent being released from WWE due to budget cuts. We've covered that way too much on this show. And then every time the quarterly earnings report comes around, it's record earnings, record earnings, record earnings. You've got a record spike now with Raw ratings. Everything is coming up cash for WWE right now. I mean, it looks very much that they are open for business if somebody is interested in them. And I also think that, oh gosh, the Khan guy, not Tony, the other one that works for WWE.
Nick, yeah.
Yeah, Nick Khan is in a position as co-CEO with Stephanie to make WWE that much more attractive, because you still have the family there to run the wrestling business, but you also have somebody very much in this media business sphere who is steering the ship too. And I also read that Nick Khan and Dwayne Johnson are incredibly good friends.
Yeah. In fact, what was it? Nick's wife is somehow involved in the creation of Young Rock. She's on that creative team. There's synergy there. And The Rock obviously is one major player, but industry wide, the stories about the stock going up has shown that there are other interested parties. NBC Universal being a very obvious choice. Mm-hmm. They already have the Peacock streaming platform with WWE content on it, and most of the WWE content that's being produced outside of the streaming service is on NBC Universal stations. Amazon reportedly interested. Even Disney has been linked as a possible buyer. I'm not sure I can see the world of WWE within the Disney portfolio, but stranger things have happened. There's definitely, in an era when everyone needs their own streaming service, everyone is desperate for readily monetizable content, and WWE would show up with 40 years worth of Prime Video library and not only of their own material, but they basically own 90% of wrestling history at this point. And to any potential buyer, that's content ready to stream.
Yeah, I think the only buyers that are probably off the table would be Warner Brother Discovery at this point, since they're looking to slash everything.
Which is next week's topic. A lot going on. But yeah, I kind of agree that I don't know how or when, and hopefully if it does happen, they will not unsteady the ship, as it were, because right now it seems like we're heading in a direction that seems promising at the very least. But how long we stay on this course before the apple cart's upturned again and WWE is sold. It was kind of, when Vince had the death grip on the business, it was kind of obvious that despite what his initial wishes were, he was not willing or ready yet to step aside creatively or business-wise for his daughter, nor was he that ready or eager to actually give up shareholder control of the company as well. But depending on what happens with these myriad of investigations and what the board decides to do, we could very well see, Prime Video as the host for all WWE content beyond the Peacock contract running short.
I just hope it's some service I already have.
Same. Like the last thing I want is yet another streaming service.
I mean, this is the whole reason I did the cord cutting and got away from cable. I have service after service after service.
We're piecing the old cable model back together just with streaming services, right?
That's so true. But that's a topic for another show.
For another show. Well, for now, assuming the company stays as it is, which is a big assumption, as we just we're talking about with a possible sell. But let's look at Steph as co-CEO and Triple H as head of both talent and of creative. This is the way, Doug, it was always supposed to end up, but just not the way that any of us, including McMahon family, expected to get there. Doug, it's early, but there seems to be a lot of optimism and goodwill from both internet wrestling community like ourselves, as well as reportedly from the locker room.
Mm-hmm. I think, and I mentioned this before, like the angry old marks like us. Well, okay, I'm the angry old mark yelling at clouds. You not so much. But for the marks like us who are those wrestling fans, we're looking at this through a different lens than Joe average fan who's taken the wife and the kids to a event, a house show, a Raw, a SmackDown taping, watching it with the kids. There's two very different fan bases here, but I think right now there's a marriage of the two. Going forward, there's people who really don't even know or care what's going on with Vince McMahon. There's people 2 years from now going to go, hey, why doesn't Vince come out anymore? Why? I haven't heard No Chance in Hell in a while. People are just going to be oblivious to it. Those people, I think, are on board with what's going on right now. They're enjoying the product. And then there's like the folks like us who have a better understanding of what's going on, or at least think we have a grasp of what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that community is very, very optimistic right now and is just willing to give anything a chance if it doesn't have that out of touch McMahon stench to it right now.
And there has famously been talent, and Naomi and Sasha are not in a vacuum. They're just the ones most recent to have walked away and took a stand. But a lot of talent, Mustafa Ali, folks that had asked for the release, that there has to be renewed optimism. When you see Ali getting some love on Raw and Tommaso Ciampa going over and returns like Io Sky and things, it's like, and not just who's getting pushed and who's back on, but who's not.
Right. Yeah.
There's deep pushes too, and I'm not saying this is happening, but I've not seen Omos in a couple of weeks, and we knew that Vince was really in love with big, imposing physical wrestlers that maybe were not that great of wrestlers, that he put way more faith in size and look than work rate and stars, for matches, which maybe is different than what his son-in-law thinks. Who do you think's going to benefit most from this creative change? And who do you think, which wrestlers or type of wrestlers do you think maybe aren't so excited right now?
So I would say anybody who came up from NXT and was a beast in NXT and then was a joke on the main roster has a really good chance of finally being somebody on the main roster. And, I think the more classic folks, I'll call them wrestling classics, there's still some gas in the tank with folks like Edge. Randy Orton still got some gas in the tank. But, I think Triple H recognizes that he cannot, rest the company on those folks and is going to start pushing. We're going to see more Tommaso Ciampa. We're going to let AJ Styles be AJ Styles. I think we're going to get to see that. Finn Balor. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Man, just anybody who's come up from the main roster from NXT, black and gold. Lacey Evans. Well.
Pull this one up because this might be an outlier because in general, I'm thinking that those that are not going to benefit from this are your Omos's, maybe your Baron Corbin's, your big guys that aren't over with the crowd. But Lacey Evans is a unique case in that she wasn't NXT call up, who is a good wrestler and can play a good character, but I think they've seemed extremely confused from the time that she's been up as to how to portray that character. Is she a heel? Is she a face? Is she a hero? Is she, now they're playing up the same hero bit for, her detriment instead of to get folks to buy in and like her. So I think that's almost some schizophrenic booking on Vince's part, but she definitely had Vince's attention.
Well, yeah, she did. But that's a very good point, because she didn't come up through NXT, and I think all those folks who were outside, not indie stars or wrestlers per se, but folks who were just like, hey, I'm athletic, I did this, I played this college sport, I'm going to go to one of these tryouts, because there was that big push recently for WWE to get all this talent that's not from a wrestling background, bring them in and make them wrestlers. And I was reading that, the last time they tried that recently with SummerSlam, it ended horribly. And they were like, okay, we have got to stop this. Multiple injuries, all the tryouts just went bad, because a lot of these folks were not trained wrestlers, but other collegiate athletes coming from a multitude of backgrounds. So I think there's a lot of potential for that, and the folks maybe not even on the main roster, but back on the NXT roster that just aren't cutting it, to be cut.
So we're not necessarily saying that the wave of rehires and optimism surrounding a new creative team necessarily means that we've seen the end of WWE layoffs. I'm not sure that there's not places that the roster can be trimmed. I think that we, as those who critique the industry, may have just taken question with those that they chose to cut compared to those they chose to keep.
Absolutely, because look who they look. Dakota Kai back. We'll get around to talking about a return on SmackDown this weekend after this kid got buried in a gimp outfit on the main roster in his debut. But Triple H is making amends there. I'm still not keen on name changes, even if they're very subtle.
So, we're focusing a lot, obviously, on Raw and SmackDown, and some of the changes thus far are superficial, but they do mean a lot. The whole language, the idea of Vince McMahon not being, against the word or not allowing the word wrestling. Roman Reigns on Friday night talked about sending a man to the hospital, and I had to do a double take. I'm like, wait a minute, don't you mean a local medical facility?
Exactly.
We've all almost have it ingrained that, referees don't have names, and just very small, subtle changes that Triple H has already made. Again, these might be superficial, but they add up to not just a better experience for us that don't get aggravated by, dumb rules, but one set of talent that will definitely benefit from this that we've not talked about, because we're just talking about the wrestlers, is Vince McMahon is not in your ear yelling. I don't know that there's a harder job in all of wrestling than a WWE announcer. To a person, anyone that's come through that announce booth, whether they were a failed experiment like Adam Lee, or a former employee like JR, or,
Mm-hmm.
You can go on and on. Like every Mick Foley, I couldn't handle Vince yelling at me or cussing at me. You're on live TV, and this very aggressive man, Vince, for better or worse, what helped him to be so cutthroat and revolutionize the industry is also what alienated him as well. That personality, Mr. McMahon character, is not too very removed from Vincent K. McMahon himself. The announcers have to feel like they've got a reprieve. They've been let out of jail because they don't have Vince cussing them out on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. You can just hear it in their voices, and I love the play between Michael Cole and Corey Graves at SummerSlam. I liked it better when you couldn't have an opinion, and a lot's changed. That just banter right there.
That really encapsulates the whole story, doesn't it? They are free to make that joke, and they probably sound freer because they aren't being yelled at. The word is that there is a lot more creative freedom, at least right now, being allowed. Both the announcers, for certain, who aren't being overproduced, but that actually there's been some reports I read this week that the wrestlers themselves are being allowed to improvise more on promos, as well as calling their matches in the ring, which over the recent era of wrestling, they've tended to scripted, especially if you're on television or pay-per-view, those things tend to be really tightly scripted, and pretty much everything that comes out of your mouth would be tightly scripted. And now there's talk that it may be going back a little bit of the new style mixed with the old style of you go out there and you just cut a promo, be yourself, or call your matches based on what the audience is reacting to. That's a very old school approach to professional wrestling.
Yes, it is. And I love that. I think, that maybe this is I don't know, a bit of a grumpy old man in me, but I think, you should give that freedom to your veterans, or those who, I don't see NXT kids doing that unless they've come up through the indies, but we really don't have any people coming up through the indies that are still in that, multicolored, color splash NXT. I don't think. I'm not watched the product in a while, but
let me switch to that then, because we're talking main roster, but there are reports that there are changes coming to NXT. I don't know if it's now NXT 2.1 or what they'll end up having to call it, but Shawn Michaels is doing a great job with 2.0. He really is. In Triple H's absence, when he was sent to the woodshed and cast aside, Shawn took over, and there were changes. The whole roster was remade, and that was painful, and people didn't like that. But now, Doug, this past week, reports that Triple H is, while continuing with the young talent as being the four and knowing they need to make stars at the NXT level that actually can get over on Raw and SmackDown, which wasn't happening because of that disconnect between the NXT level and the main brand level, but that they were open to once again begin bringing back indie and veteran talent to NXT to sort of revive the gold and the black version of the brand with just a lot of the new faces that are working hard on NXT 2.0. You also have to think, now the man down there in charge is your best buddy.
Right.
So there's definite connection there, so that maybe you won't see the whole failure of we're going to retool that NXT gimmick up here on the main roster. There might be more of a trust and handshake agreement between DX teammates there to hand off these kids fully formed and let them continue to get over on the main brand. NXT may be a completely different experience in a few weeks also.
It may be. I love the idea of having a place where they can create new talent and grow new talent, but the black and gold works so well to create this indie niche within WWE that could, in my mind at least, translate so easily to the main roster. But time and time again, you saw people almost get completely repackaged or just forgotten about, and their accomplishments from NXT not even mentioned when they got to the main roster. It's like that brand didn't even exist. It was never a third brand. It was just like this thing down south that we don't talk about where they come from. They're just here now. I would like to see that connection continue, in this McMahon Helmsley era, if we're going to call it that.
It is.
where we see that there's a logical progression of characters. Start out in NXT, you come to the main roster, you get to keep your name. Or if you do a name change, Braun Breaker, look at you. Let's call you Steiner. Let's do that now. Let's recognize that family history.
Let's do it. That would be a good indicator that changes could be on the way to NXT if something like that could hopefully happen. NXT, Raw, SmackDown, we are optimistic about this. We're optimistic about what Triple H has done. It is a very small sample size, very small, but what's there has been engaging, and the reports that we're all reading are promising. Let's look for a second, Doug, outside of WWE. We know that this seems like in the short term, it's at least been good thus far, and it makes us hopeful for the future. But Triple H is reportedly going to be aggressive when it comes to bringing folks home that he wants to bring home and competing for other wrestling contracts for people he wants on WWE's brand. So what does this mean for AEW and WWE promotions, long term, your Tony Khan's, what does the Triple H Stephanie alliance mean as opposed to when Vince was in charge?
It means, and I don't think this is overly dramatic either, but we have or maybe a wrestling Cold War. We don't have a Monday Night War just yet, but I think we are now starting to see a Cold War brewing because this is all going to be done, through back channels and within the confines of contracts and what can and cannot be done and things like that. But people are going to see changes. People who left with very specific grievances no longer have those grievances keeping them away, I think. And that's going to be a little bit more enticing to them to come back to WWE. I mean, we can see Chris Jericho finishing his wrestling career in WWE now. We can see things like that. And it's up to Tony Khan and other wrestling promoters to keep their wrestlers happy, to keep creative flowing, and just overall create a better product. And, from that, I think we all win. But, we're going to see a wrestling Cold War. And I think we've started to we've not finally see it, but just see it with Dakota Kai, returning to WWE programming along with, Karrion Kross, so we're going to see that now instead of them hopping the fence over to AEW. We're going to see a lot more people probably jump over to WWE unless things pick up over there now.
So, in many ways, this, as we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking in many ways there was some foreshadowing going on when Cody Rhodes, that at the time, that's a real unicorn story. Like one of the founders of AEW comes over to Vince Land, but Triple H was the key to making that happen. Those conversations weren't necessarily Vince and Cody. Yes, you sit in the room with the old man at some point and right. Talk out the business side of things. But Triple H was fielding those phone calls, putting out those feelers. That could be a real foreshadowing of how he looks at, we didn't make him. He made himself on the indies and in Japan and with AEW, but that doesn't mean we can't own that. We can't take that. Vince there towards the end, especially to cut budget, almost seemed content to let your Malachi Blacks and your, Andrades just walk out the door, and it's not going to make a difference to my bottom line. I don't care. I'll just put a bow on you and send you to Tony, and he'll give you a job. It doesn't make any difference to me. This would be a whole new thing for Triple H if these reports are true, that he actually would go after AEW talent, your MJFs of the world who are disgruntled in Tony land, and acknowledge that competition and actually relish that competition and being able to outbid them. Because for all the money that Tony Khan has, the entrenched system that is WWE on the long haul, that's going to be a hard thing for Tony or any other company to compete with, because the finances of a publicly traded company with such a long history and so entrenched in media and streaming platforms and things, that's going to be hard to overcome if it gets into a true bidding war.
And if things do come to fruition, like we're talking about, you're going to have NBC Universal, Disney, Amazon, backing this company too. Because I think even if WWE gets sold tonight, Stephanie and Triple H are going to be driving that forward for quite a while, especially Triple H from the front end with creative. They're going to trust the people who built the show to keep running the show.
That's an interesting one too. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. The idea that AEW was the promised land where all of Vince's misfit toys went and showed the old man how wrong he was, that AEW as the alternative and the proving ground, I mean, it still is this great work rate company that has a lot of excitement and momentum behind it, but they're no longer the only product that diehard wrestling fans are excited about right now. And for reasons just like that, like we did all benefit from Raw when and Nitro going head to head. When both were good, it was, back then, VHS tape recording one and then rewinding it. I mean, I didn't miss either show. And this was before it was so easy just to stream or DVR something. I mean, a true competition with fans not having much to complain about with either company. That sounds like a wrestling golden age, regardless if it doesn't end well for one of the two companies in the end of the day.
Yeah, this. What are you doing, buddy?
Tony's come to yank him off air because he's been praising Vince McMahon for the WWE product for a moment too long.
Here, what are you?
No, it's definitely it's a new day for sure in the world of professional wrestling.
Almost there.
I agree, David, that we got MJF, who has got to be considered one of the best heels out there.
Yes.
And if he is truly as disgruntled as he apparently appears to be, he could never have gotten along with a Vince McMahon who would have imposed so many rules, a name change, a character change. But as we saw with Cody, Triple H is open to not just do business with you. He's open for you to come and be the character that you made.
And Triple H, let's not forget, Triple H was the guy who let Samoa Joe continue to be Samoa Joe. So no name change there. AJ Styles, still AJ Styles.
Yeah.
Shinsuke Nakamura, still Shinsuke Nakamura.
So, man, I'm excited. I've seen nothing thus far that would make me anything less than continuing to be excited and hopeful that again, Vince, we owe a lot. We owe the format of wrestling, the format of pay-per-views, all of that is in Vince's image. Not to say someone else wouldn't eventually come along and figured out the whole cable thing and the whole monetizing pay-per-view thing and things, but they didn't. He was the man who did all of that.
So true.
First at the level that he did. But now we have a wrestling landscape where 1 and 2 both have excitement. And there's not really that idea that there's one of the promotions that are just out of touch with their customer base right now. Who couldn't be excited about that if you're a true wrestling fan?
Good times for all of us, man. Finally, good times for all of us all around. I hope it lasts.
Let's hope it lasts. What won't last, Doug, unfortunately, is our show. We need to start wrapping things up. So with that being our main event topic, are you ready to big finish it?
I am ready to big finish, man. I am ready to big finish.
What is your botch of the week, Doug?
Man, anything with that big Indian dude, what's the Satnam Singh from AEW? I'm not happy with the way that this dude may have an extreme amount of talent. If he does, I'm not saying it. I look at him and I think great Khali, except AEW brand. He's great Khali light. That I want to see better in a big. I don't know. Just what we've been talking about for the last hour. This Vince McMahon Land of the Giants thing prioritizes look over work rate. I see that with him. I saw it again last night. I'm just not feeling this, man. They could do so much better.
Honestly, if it wasn't for the timing, Doug, I would have thought that Vince retired and Tony hired him, and he hired this guy because
exactly.
It seems like a total Vince McMahon move. Let's take a basketball player who couldn't make it as a basketball player and make him a wrestler because he's tall, and people will think that's really impressive.
I mean, my goodness, let's make me a wrestler. I'm tall. I'm not Satnam Singh tall, but
and you're good at no sports. At least he was
exactly. I mean, it's almost the same concept here.
I can't argue with you on that one, honestly.
I mean, I get it.
I've seen.
I get it that there's let's get the there's an entire continent there that we have a potential market for, so let's get a big star and push them. But you can do the same thing with me, but I guess Appalachia already has a pretty big built-in wrestling market. Don't need to get wrestling over here, I guess.
Probably not. Oh goodness, my botch of the week, and I rarely do this, but I'm actually going to double down and go botch of the week. Same botch twice. Ooh. Last week we were reviewing SummerSlam, and we both had as our botch of the week that awful ending to the Liv and Ronda Rousey match. And it's my botch of the week this week because, as we speculated last week, and I think to quote you exactly, this did no favors for Liv. Well, we saw the fruit of that on Friday night.
Let me tell you, man, I was this close to going with this, what you're going to talk about.
Poor Liv, who is so passionate about this business and waited so long for this moment, had to endure "you tapped out" chants and boos, and to her credit, she thought on her feet and did pretty well in that promo. But I felt so sorry for her because as soon as it started, I thought, and this is what happens when you book the end of that match that way. There's no way in the world at this point in her title reign as a major, featured face female champion, she should have to be worried about the fans turning like that. And that's only because of booking decisions. Nothing at all with the way that she's handled herself.
Yeah, I was so close, man, but I just really had to do a Land of the Giants rant there because absolutely doing Liv no favors because it's like good job you just turned her heel somehow.
Yeah.
What just happened? What did you just do?
How about performer of the week, Doug, or performance of the week?
Triple H, man. Good day. Only reason I wore this shirt tonight.
First time I've seen him, folks, in WWE merchandise in a couple of years. He had to pull that one out from the back of the closet.
I may wear this shirt to AEW when we go next week. But seriously, man, performer of the week, this man is turning things around. There is so much optimism in the wrestling community right now with what if it's not what he is doing, with what he can potentially do. I mean, he's got Dakota Kai back. He brought Io Shirai, or Io Sky, almost a botch of mine, but Io Sky to the main roster. He brings back Karrion Kross and Scarlett Bordeaux and brings them back right. So right. That's how you do Karrion Kross, Killer Kross, whatever he's called this time. I don't know. Kross. That's how you do Kross, okay?
Yeah, man.
Big talk, man. Kudos to Triple H.
I know the whole hour has been almost like a Triple H love fest, but how can I disagree with that? That's my performer of the week, too. I wanted to go somebody else. I tried to think of other things since I knew we were going to spend so much time talking about the creative decisions that have already been made. And this isn't just hey, Vince is gone, we're just giving this guy a pass. We're talking on Raw, Tommaso Ciampa winning a high-stakes match and Mustafa Ali being heavily featured. Io Sky featured on Raw. With tons of women's action. Women are especially going to benefit from Triple H's leadership. The clip package that they did on Raw from the U.S. title and who all held it and why it's important to try to reestablish that importance. The World Tag Titles, Tag Team Wrestling, was featured in Triple H's main event on Monday. And then what does he do for an encore on SmackDown? Just, more women's action in a lengthy match and segment. Yeah. The return of Killer Kross with Scarlett Bordeaux in the main event segment. It's time to play the freaking game. I'm all in. Triple H, goodness gracious, performer of the week.
I don't know. I feel appropriate that I have my Lemmy bobblehead.
There's literally no complaints that I have, other than if he booked that Liv Ronda ending, but I have to think that maybe that was already like in Ronda's contract and Vince gave that or something, because outside of that, everything's almost been like perfectly aligned to the way that I would have called it.
Yes, absolutely. So how about that match?
We might be on the same page here too, but
was it from last night?
It was definitely from last night.
You go ahead.
Man, ROH World Champion match. Claudio Castagnoli versus Kanuska.
I've been trying to say his name right.
Takashita.
It's like, I don't know. Takashita? Liam has been practicing.
I mean, that was everything that you could hopefully want. And I mean, Claudio is one of those guys. I'm putting it in the comments because I can spell it. I just can't pronounce it.
Yeah, neither can we.
I mean, he is. Both of these guys showed last night what a world title feel should be for a professional wrestling match.
Absolutely. And not just these guys in the ring, but the announce team for that made everything feel important. Just deconstructing the match, talking about why, Claudio kicks out and rolls a certain way, when he's kicking out and trying to get out. Just things
get off of his back and all that.
Yeah, just put the product over as much as they did. Just that entire team, because I'm kind of the guys in the ring, the camera work, the announcers, everybody just made that something so special.
We all knew that Claudio wasn't going to lose the world title, not this early in his reign, to someone who's not yet quite known in this country. But everyone in that audience and us watching at home, were riveted and drawn in that maybe this might happen, because that kid can go too.
In that last third, man, it just, good stuff.
And this is the kind of thing that probably has Triple H, for all the good week and a half that he's had, this is probably still the kind of thing that gets the competitive juices in Triple H going, daggone it. If it had just been a few more months beforehand, this wouldn't be happening right now, because I'd have never let that guy get away to begin with.
Exactly.
Because, Vince famously on Steve Austin's podcast said, the guy doesn't have charisma. He doesn't connect with the audience, about Claudio Castagnoli, and who I think is reveling in the fact to prove Vince McMahon wrong by going out and having matches like the one that he had last night with Kanuska Takahashi. That guy, check him out.
When we go off air, I'll let Liam pronounce his name the way he tried to pronounce it. But we're waiting till we go off air for that.
Well, speaking of going off air, Doug, we're lockstep on Performer, and we're in lockstep on Match of the Week. If you didn't see that match, folks, go check out Battle of the Belts 3.
Absolutely.
Next week, actually, we have another really interesting topic. And I know the world of wrestling, we have all been focused on the fall of Vince McMahon and what that means for WWE. It's probably the only thing that has taken this other news item off the main page of wrestling fans' minds, and that is the fact that, as Doug, you alluded to earlier, there's a lot of cuts going on in that corporate world that AEW is now part of.
Absolutely. Scary things happen at Warner Discovery. So
we're going to dive into that next week, what this merger means and how AEW might factor in a doomsday scenario, what their chances are. We all know the WCW story. So how will AEW be different? What might Tony do if worse comes to worse? We're going to explore all that next week. Doug, we're going to have another heavy topic. So, man, get the notes ready.
I always come with the notes, Kevin.
Folks, we appreciate you joining us. Like, follow, subscribe. Sundays at 8, unless we're live after a pay-per-view. We'll see you next Sunday at 8. We're talking AEW.
Stay awesome, everybody. Go watch some wrestling.
I want to say that.
Nope, you don't, not yet.